Then thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here today with us. Thanks as well for our attendees who are following us remotely. Thanks to our distinguished guests today with us, especially our expert from the US West Coast again, because they are here, they're with us, and there is 6 a.m. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate that. Thank also to Mrs. Kinichi, Katerina Kinichi, and MEP Hilde Wattmans for hosting this webinar, for hosting this expert meeting on the EU legislation to fight child sexual abuse online. What is the role of the private sector? And what is the role of technology in this fight? So before giving the floor to MEP Kinichi and Wattmans to actually do the welcoming remarks, I would just like to share some few technical announcements. So I see that everyone actually now has muted the microphone. Please also make sure to then turn on the video while you're speaking. I please kindly ask you to be mindful about the times, given that we only have 1.5 hours for today's meeting. Then the expert presentation will be followed by a Q&A session. Now, without further ado, I will leave the floor to MEP Katerina Kinichi, who is the co-chair of the Intergroup on Children's Rights, who will deliver the welcoming remarks. Mrs. Kinichi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Ciao a tutti. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very glad to welcome you all to this expert meeting on the new EU legislation regarding the fight against child sexual abuse online. Ms. Wattmans and me, we have decided to organize this meeting to focus on the role of the private sector and technology in this crucial fight, which involves all of us. We all agree, I think, child sexual abuse and exploitation, both online but also offline, represent not only one of the most severe forms of violence, but also one of the most intolerable and deplorable violation of human rights, the right of children. Figures, you know, are very dramatically alarming. The Council of Europe estimates that in Europe, 1 in 5 children fall victim to some form of violence, of sexual violence. Reports on the child sexual abuse online concerning the EU sharply increased from 23,000 in 2010 to more than 700,000 in 2019, with more than 3 million images and videos. And in 2019, Europe reached the sad world record of hosted child sexual abuse imagery. And we know that the COVID pandemic has made the situation ever worse. Due to school closure, children have spent more time than before online, and thus increasing the risk of children coming into contact with online predators. On the other hand, as reported by Europol, the demand for child sexual abuse material has increased, which leads to new abuse. We shall never forget, in fact, that behind each image, behind each video, there is a real child whose life risks to be seriously affected forever. For this reason, since the very beginning of the mandate of the European Commission, the Intergroup on Children's Rights and myself personally have demanded for a strong, ambitious and brave action at EU level to stop this phenomenon through a holistic, multidisciplinary and multi-sectorial approach. And once more, I want to thank Commissioner Johansson for being so sensitive to these issues and for presenting such a comprehensive and ambitious EU strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse online. The strategy was announced during an event hosted by the Commissioner Johansson and me last June, then published at the end of July and officially presented in Libe Committee last month. As a first step of this strategy, the Commission adopted last month a proposal for a regulation on a temporary derogation from certain provision of the so-called e-privacy directive as regards the detection of child sexual abuse online, which is the objective of today's meeting. At present, certain providers of a number independent interpersonal communication service are already using a specific technology to detect child sexual abuse on their service and report it to law enforcement authority and to organization acting in the public interest against child sexual abuse and to remove child sexual abuse material. However, next December, with the entry into force of the European Electronic Communication Code, those communication services will be covered by e-privacy directive. Therefore, the current practice to detect child sexual abuse online could interfere with certain provision of this directive, which does not contain an explicit legal basis for voluntary detection of child sexual abuse online. According to Commission explanation, the new proposal aims to introduce an interim solution in view of a longer-term legislation. This interim solution, allowing service providers to continue using specific technologies and their current activity of detection, report, and removal of child sexual abuse online. This meeting aims to better understand how such technologies work through the contribution of all actors involved in the cycle of the fight against child sexual abuse online. So we will therefore hear from Ms. Boucher, Global Digital Safety Advocate in Microsoft, as a representative of a tech company that use those technological tools to detect child sexual abuse. She will explain us how they do it. We will have Professor Farid, professor in digital forensic and image analysis at the University of California. And I thank you again, our guest, who intervened photo DNA and the hashing technology, who will explain exactly what these instruments are and how they actually work. Once the tech company detects the material, they report it to the US National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which conduct a human review. Ms. DeLune, Senior Vice President of the Chief Operating Officer, will tell us how the process goes. After the human review, the youth center reports the material to Europol. Ms. Delaney, team leader of combating child sexual abuse online and related crimes, will explain to us into details about Europol's activity and cooperation with the national law enforcement authorities. Finally, we will give the voice to the child, to a child victim themselves. We'll have a survivor, Rihanna, sharing with us her experience to show that behind the figures, as I said before, there is a face, there is a human being, there is a child. Protection of children is in fact the reason we are doing all of this. And I really want to thank Rihanna for her brave testimony. I think it's not easy to give a to be testimony about this. So I very thank you so much, Rihanna, for this. But after the presentation of the expert, sorry for my English, in any case, there will be a question and answer session with a member of the European Parliament and the representative of the Commission and the Council. Unfortunately, Ms. Sippel, rapporteur for the proposal of a regulation, will not be able to join us due to previous taken commitment. But we will have Mr. Zarzaloyos, APP Shadow Rapporteur, and Ms. Intveld, Renew Shadow Rapporteur. Then Ms. Bauer-Alst, head of Cybercrime Unit of European Commission, and Mr. Dim from the German Presidency of the Council. We know that sensitive issues are involved and that some might have some valid concerns about the interference with the other fundamental right as personal data protection. So we want to give the opportunity to address to our expert today and concern at any questions. I just thank you all our distinguished guests, all of you, for being here. And I'm sure that we will have a great opportunity to deepen all this interesting aspect, because as I usually say, the responsibility about children, about their wellness is a responsibility of all of us. So thank you so much to participate to this meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Kenichi, for such comprehensive introduction and for breaking down for us as well who are all the actors involved in this cycle in the fight against child sexual abuse online. So thank you so much for that. I will now leave the floor to MEP Hilde Wattmans, also our co-chair on the Intergroup on Children's Rights, to also share with us some welcoming remarks. Hilde, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Emilio, and thank you, Katerina, for your very good introduction. I will be very brief because I think it's very important that we listen to the experts, that we listen to the survivors, that we listen to each other, because my priority here in the European Parliament, my priority number one is the fight against sexual abuse of children, online and offline. And what I really need from you, all of you here together in this meeting, is more arguments to help me to, in fact, convince all the other ones to vote with us the good legislation. We have to vote legislation, but we need to have good views. I'm convinced about the legislation that the Commission will propose. I'm convinced that it's a priority because I also have children, and I think if we don't protect the children, who will? We need to do that. So my introduction is very brief. I'm looking forward to this expert meeting. I'm looking forward to your declarations. I hope to learn a lot so that I have more arguments to convince all the other parliamentarians to vote with us. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for supporting us in the fight. You can count on us, on the Intergroup, on Emilio, on Katerina, on all the other members. We will always keep fighting for children's rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hilde. Thank you so much. Thank you as well for your leadership on that, which we really appreciate that. So I will now leave the floor to our first speaker, Jacqueline Boucher from Microsoft. Jacqueline, could you please tell us more? How does Microsoft work in practice, and what are the tools that you guys used in Microsoft to detect sexual abuse material? Please, the floor is yours, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Emilio, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to present to you today. I'm Jacqueline Boucher, Microsoft's Global Digital Safety Advocate. Today's discussion is critical. We, and indeed all of industry, are concerned about our ability, our continued ability, to detect illegal child sexual exploitation and abuse material on our services. This ongoing fight is also one of Parliament's top priorities. We note Parliament's November 2019 resolution on children's rights, where Parliament stressed, and I quote, the need for more investment, in particular from industry and the private sector, in research and development and new technologies designed to detect child sexual abuse material online and expedite takedown and removal procedures, unquote. We share this sense of urgency. Still, we're concerned that the coming into effect of the European Electronic Communications Code may significantly chill the use and development of such impactful technologies. Today, I'll detail how Microsoft enforces its policies on child sexual exploitation and abuse imagery, and how we use photo-DNA robust hash matching and a new grooming detection technique to help protect our customers and the integrity of our services. First, allow me to explain our policies. When people want to use Microsoft services, they sign up to the Microsoft Services Agreement, and they agree to a code of conduct. This code explicitly states that it is prohibited to engage in activity that exploits, harms, or threatens to harm children. And there are ramifications for violations. Sharing child sexual exploitation and abuse material means, first, we close your Microsoft account, and second, we file a cyber tip report with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which then refers the report as appropriate to law enforcement. I'll briefly explain two technical innovations that have helped to protect our customers, the integrity of our services, as well as the victims and survivors of child sexual exploitation and abuse. Photo-DNA is one piece of Microsoft's voluntary business strategy to protect its customers, systems, and reputation by creating a safer online environment. Photo-DNA creates a unique digital signature of an image known as a hash, which can then be compared against a database of other digital signatures, so other hashes, of illegal photos to find copies of the same illegal image. Photo-DNA helps detect, disrupt, and report the distribution of child sexual exploitation and abuse imagery. Photo-DNA is not facial recognition software, and it cannot be used to identify a person or an object in an image. A photo-DNA hash is not reversible and therefore cannot be used to recreate an image. We created Photo-DNA in 2009 together with Dartmouth College and Dr. Hani Farid. Microsoft continues to provide this valuable technology for free now to more than 300 qualified organizations, including technology companies, developers, and nonprofit organizations for the sole and exclusive purpose of combating child sexual exploitation and abuse. Photo-DNA is not used in any way whatsoever to scan any customer content for any commercial purpose. Please allow me to reiterate that. Photo-DNA is not used in any way whatsoever to scan any customer content for any commercial purpose. We use Photo-DNA at Microsoft on several of our services, including OneDrive Cloud Storage, the Xbox Live gaming platform, Bing Search, and the LinkedIn Professional Social Network. In January, Microsoft, in cooperation with 3 other technology companies, announced the free availability of a grooming detection technique to help identify potential instances of child online grooming for sexual purposes that may be taking place in non-real-time, text-based chat conversations. This technique can be used by online services offering a chat feature to identify signals of potentially problematic conversations for follow-on human review. Microsoft partnered with the NGO Thorn to make this technique freely available to qualified users. These include technology companies of all sizes, law enforcement agencies, and civil society organizations that might benefit from an automated evaluation of non-real-time written chat conversations. The technique is currently available for the English language only. Microsoft did not develop this grooming detection technique for the purpose of assisting law enforcement, and it is not used on encrypted messaging services. At Microsoft, we currently use this technique with Xbox Live. The grooming detection technique leverages certain regular expressions in typical chat conversations. It evaluates and rates a series of conversation characteristics and assigns a probability rating to each aspect of that conversation. These ratings can then be used by individual companies to determine when conversations should be sent to human moderators for review. Human moderators then review the flagged conversations for indicia of child online grooming for sexual purposes. If confirmed, Microsoft files a cyber tip report and refers the issue to the relevant law enforcement agency if known. Speaking as a developer and a deployer of these technologies, Microsoft welcomes the Commission's intent to legislate, to maintain the status quo, and to ensure that newly designated electronic communication services can continue to detect and thwart the distribution of illegal child sexual exploitation and abuse material. The interim regulation would create legal certainty and clarity across the EU as to ongoing voluntary efforts to detect illegal child sexual exploitation and abuse online. Proportionality, necessity, and the balancing of fundamental rights play an important role in the development and deployment of our technologies. Microsoft has narrowly scoped the use of these technologies to the strictly necessary processing to combat the online dissemination of child sexual abuse imagery and potential instances of child online sexual grooming. Microsoft minimizes the data involved to protect against the risk of abuse. In other words, we filter the minimum content necessary and neither store nor process any results of these efforts other than those that are flagged by the technologies. To prove that our sole and exclusive intention in deploying these technologies is to fight child sexual exploitation and abuse, we have submitted a sworn, legally binding affidavit stating that these technologies are used only for this specific purpose. And we will happily make this sworn affidavit available to this intergroup and to the responsible committee. Last year, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 16.9 million reports of suspected online child sexual exploitation and abuse. That equates to nearly 70 million images, videos, and associated files. Given such volumes, these tools and processes are essential to the fight against child sexual exploitation and abuse online and to encourage future innovation. PhotoDNA is effective at limiting the spread of illegal imagery online. We believe the grooming detection technique may hold even more promise because it operates at the earliest stages of potential exploitation. It can help prevent in-person meetings between adults and minors and thus help prevent potential instances of hands-on child sexual abuse. Finally, our efforts are clearly in the public interest and aim to safeguard children. In closing, we appreciate the willingness of European policymakers to learn more about these life-saving technologies, to weigh all considerations, and to set rules to protect the most vulnerable among us, and indeed, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for such a powerful and thorough and detailed presentation, also showing to us what is the commitment of Microsoft and the tremendous work that you guys are doing in the fight against sexual abuse online. Thank you so much for that. I would also like to say here that, of course, all our experts will stay with all of our experts will stay with us as well in the Q&A session. And precisely for Microsoft, Jacqueline will be also joined by Jeff Brown, who serves as the Associate Counsel in Microsoft Privacy and Regulatory Affairs, and Cornelia Cutterer. So now I will leave the floor. I will move on to our next distinguished guest, who is Dr. Hani Farid. So Hani Farid is also the one who has literally invented PhotoDNA, so we owe him that. And it's here with us today to explain to us how it works in practice, adding to what Jacqueline has already said. Hani, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Emilio, and it's good to be here. Thank you very much. Instead of sharing my screen, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to ask everybody, if you don't mind, to either put Zoom into speaker mode or just go ahead and pin my video so that you can see what I'm doing in full screen. So thank you, Jacqueline. Jacqueline did a terrific job of explaining the landscape of the technology and its use at Microsoft. And you'll hear a little bit from Michelle on what happens afterwards. And what I'm going to do now in the next 10 minutes is tell you a little bit about how these technologies actually work. So we're going to talk about photo-DNA, which is the image hashing, and we're going to talk about the grooming technology. So the way photo-DNA works is you start by identifying images. With photo-DNA, that's typically starting with NCMEC, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any trusted organization like the Canadian Centre for Child Protection or Europol or any organization that identifies images that are known and unambiguously child sexual abuse material. And it's important to understand that that process revolves human review. There are humans involved in the process of verifying that this content is in fact a child and the material is sexually explicit. As Jacqueline described, and I will describe in more detail, we extract a digital signature or a hash from each of the images. And then at the point of upload for an interactive computer service, this can be a Facebook, it can be a Microsoft, it can be a search engine, it can be a Dropbox, it can be anything where users are uploading material. Every image is the same signature is extracted right here, and you simply compare to a database of known bad content, and then it's a flag or a no flag. So notice again that this image is being compared against these images and no other images. And again, I'm going to talk some more about what these signatures are to give you a sense and an intuition for what information is actually extracted from an image. So let's start with an image. We start with a full resolution color image. And the first thing that we do is we make the image much, much smaller, 300 by 300 pixels, and we convert it to grayscale so there's no color. Lots of information still in here. You can look at the image and you can still identify it. So that's the first step. Second step is to convert the image into these two images. And I won't get into the technical details, but I will tell you what this image is doing is measuring the rate of change of intensity or color in the vertical direction. And this is measuring the rate of change in intensity or color in the horizontal direction. This is a standard manipulation that is done in the image processing community. We take each of those images. You can see there's sort of two images here. This is about the midway point right here. We break it up into 6 by 6 little blocks. In each blocks, we extract two numbers. How many of the values there are greater than or equal to 0, and how many of the values are less than 0. So every block here, we just get two numbers, and we do that over and over again in each of those. And finally, that full color image at full resolution gets converted to the small grayscale image, which gets converted to those two images, which then gets converted to that thing right there. That's the 12 by 12 number pixel image. It's 144 numbers. I've blown it up by 1200% just so you can see what it is. So this is what is stored in the computer. It's 144 numbers that come from the original image. And as Jacqueline said earlier very nicely, I don't think I have to work too hard to convince you that there is no identifying information in this image. Certainly when you look at it, you don't see it. Techniques to generate the image from here. And I don't think it's surprising to learn that with only 144 numbers from what is typically starts with millions of numbers, it is not an invertible. So this is what I would say is a privacy preserving signature in the sense that the content is not embedded in there. That is the signature that is extracted from each of the images of known child abuse material. And this is the signature that is compared at the point of upload. Now, a few things to understand about photo-DNA. So as I said, and as Jacqueline described earlier, converts an image into a hash. And a hash is just 144 numbers. That's it. It identifies previously flagged images. And that word right there, previously, is very important. We are not doing face recognition, as Jacqueline said. We are not doing content. We are not doing skin detection. It is simply saying we've seen this image before and we are looking for this same image again. As I've already mentioned, the hash does not reveal image content. If I send you the hash, you have no information about it. Again, Jacqueline very nicely emphasized, and I'm going to re-emphasize, there's no face recognition, there's no artificial intelligence, there is no reasoning about the content other than I've seen this image before. In very large scale tests, the misidentification rate was 1 in 50 billion. Now, just to give you a sense of this number, there's on the order of tens of millions of images uploaded every day to Facebook. So to get an error on the order of 1 in 50 billion is going to take a long time. This is not something like even your spam filter, which is very good, which probably makes a mistake, once a week or so, once a month. So, and the reason, by the way, we can hit this accuracy is because of that word right there. We are not trying to detect child sexual abuse material. We are trying to detect previously flagged child sexual abuse material. And whenever you think about deploying technology, it's good to sort of understand the landscape of other technologies. And I think it's important to understand that this technology is the same concept, and in fact, sort of the same underlying technology that is used for virus, malware, and ransomware detection. So how do these things work? Well, when a virus makes its way out, we reach into that virus and we extract a digital signature. Now, the digital signature is a little bit different because that's not an image, but we can extract a very similar type of signature. This is a known virus. This is a known malware. This is a known piece of dangerous, bad content for your computer. Then, whenever you navigate to a website, whenever you download a file, whenever somebody sends you an email, whenever you grab something from a Dropbox, there is a database of known bad signatures for virus and malware. We compare against that, and we don't allow things onto your computer that are bad for your computer. That's what we're doing here. We previously identified this with a trusted partner like the National Center, and then we simply look for those images. And so the infrastructure for photo DNA has existed for as long as we've had the modern internet in terms of virus and malware detection. All right, let me just talk very briefly about the anti-grooming. Jacqueline talked a little bit about this. So this technology, and Jacqueline said something very nice, and I want to emphasize, is that photo DNA is in some ways after the fact. The crime has been committed, the images are out there, and we're sort of just trying to stop the redistribution. I would say that's a very, very low bar. It's a bare minimum we should be doing, but the harm has already been done. The anti-grooming is trying to address the problem at the other end before the harm actually happens. And I like thinking about this life cycle of protecting children from after the fact to before the fact happens. So we know that on gaming platforms, for example, there are lots of children. Predators know this too, and so they flock to gaming platforms because that's where the kids are, and they try to engage with children. And we would like to try to disrupt that engagement between adults and children. So for example, this is a natural exchange. Trust me, I can be your dad. User 2 says, I'm afraid, I'm only 12 years old. User 1 says, I'm 25, send me some pictures. I don't want to. Where do you live? In California. Is your mom there? You can see this is escalating, and it's escalating in a terrifying way. One of the things that we have learned from looking at these types of transcripts from previously human-identified grooming conversations is that things follow a pattern. These predators essentially are working off of a script. They try to engage, they try to get you to trust them. They try to get you to not trust your parents. They try to minimize the age difference. They ask you for things, and there are patterns in speech. So for example, this is a very common one. Trust me, I can be your dad. So we look for that speech, but we don't look for exactly those words. We look for a variation of those words. So instead of your, we look for maybe why you are. The people, when people use shortcuts, or people who don't know how an apostrophe works, or maybe the father versus dad. So we look for slight variants of that, and all of the text is analyzed, and we look for three things. Is there a certain type of act? Are you trying to build trust? Are you asking for photos? Is there concealment? Don't tell your parents, don't tell your friends, don't tell anybody, a type of concealment. Again, patterns of language that are used for that. And then we try to assess the age of the two people speaking. In many cases, people will say, I'm 12 years old. So these are the types of things that we try to infer from the text. There's a little bit of logic on how to combine these. And then we have an assessment of there's no risk here at all, there is extreme risk, or there is immediate danger. So extreme risk means something very bad is happening. We need to have somebody look at it. Immediate danger means we believe that a child may be in imminent harm and we need to call the proper authorities. And so, as Jacqueline said, this is technology that is now in the hands of Thorn and is slowly being deployed out primarily on gaming platforms. Few things about the anti-grooming is that it's not looking for specific pieces of images like photo DNA, but it is looking for known grooming patterns of speech that we know that predators use. The goal here is to quantify risk, to triage for human review. So we very much believe that humans still have to be in the loop because this technology is not perfect. And this process already exists on the gaming platform. So we are simply building some filters that will trickle up things that are dangerous that may otherwise be lost. Now, as I said with photo DNA, it's good to think about how these types of technologies fit within the larger landscape of technology. And if you've been listening to what I've been describing, what I describe sounds a lot like a spam filter. In fact, it is a spam filter. It's just that we're looking for grooming and not spam. How do spam filters work? There are patterns in email that spammers use. They conceal things in certain ways. They ask, there's patterns. There's well, I won't go through the long list of the things because they're not particularly pleasant for the company here. But so there are common languages that are used. And what a spam filter does is it learns that, it scans the email for those patterns, and then it flags things as spam or not spam. And you have a spam filter, so you can go look to see if a mistake was made and fix that. And so this concept is exactly the same thing as a spam filter. So as you're thinking about these technologies, photo DNA and anti-grooming, you should ask yourself the following question. If you don't think that photo DNA and anti-grooming have a place on technology platforms, then I ask you to do the following. Turn off your spam filter. Turn off your cybersecurity that protects from viruses, malware, and ransomware, because that's the same technology. And if you believe that you should use a spam filter, and if you believe that you should protect your computer from viruses and malware, which I think you do, and if you believe that that technology has a role to protect this computer right here, then why shouldn't these technologies protect children around the world? At the end of the day, it is exactly the same technology, simply tackling a different problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Farid, for such a comprehensive and very explanatory presentation, I must say. Thank you so much for walking us through all of the technological details, because I mean, it was actually very, very, very informative for me as well personally. And I think it's very important what you said. And thank you so much, sir, for clarifying as well how the anti-grooming technology works and to draw this parallelism as well with other technologies already used and we all use as well in the case of the anti-spam and malware. So thank you so much for that. And again, I say to all of the other participants, the Professor Farid will also stay with us in the Q&A session. So there's going to be as well the possibility for him to react and answer to your questions. Thank you so much for that, Professor Farid. So I will now move on our next speaker, Michelle Delon, who's the Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of the US National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We all know that NCMEC plays a major role, invaluable role, I would say, and leads the global efforts in the fight against sexual abuse material. So, Michelle, could you please tell us a bit more how NCMEC works and what is your cooperation with the tech industry? Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilio. Okay, can everybody see this? Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and to speak to such a distinguished panel and to speak among these excellent experts that we've had the pleasure of working with over the years. We really value our working relationship with our European partners and all of the great work that you've been doing to protect children and join us in this fight. What I'd like to, why I was invited today actually to speak, as Amelia referenced, is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children does play a unique role in the global effort to combat child sexual exploitation online in particular. Just a little background on who we are. We are a nonprofit organization non-governmental organization located right outside of Washington, D.C. We are a unique entity in the sense that we are not government, we are not law enforcement. However, we play an interesting role in this fight against child exploitation. Just a little background on that, we began operating the cyber tip line in 1998 as a mechanism for members of the public to report what they believe to be child sexual exploitation, particularly online. And then in the early 2000s, a federal law was passed requiring electronic service providers and tech companies, if they become aware of child sexual abuse imagery, to report it somewhere. We were the natural location because we already had an entity and a system set up. And given the many, many law enforcement agencies within the United States, over 18,000, the tech companies were not going to be able to identify which police agency to work with in any particular case. So we act again as the clearinghouse for tech companies in the US, as well as members of the public to report incidents of child sexual exploitation. Operating the cyber tip line is continuing to expand, continuing to evolve. I actually started with the cyber tip line over 20 years ago, and I have seen the tremendous improvements and the evolution of the impact of this program. I'd like to just walk you through a little bit on the flow of how these reports arrive and what we do with them. As you can see on the top left there, something will precipitate a report. It may be a parent who becomes concerned about something that their child is doing online or communicating with online, or for the purposes of this conversation, and quite frankly, for the purposes of the majority of the reports we receive, a tech company becomes aware of potential child sexual exploitation or abuse imagery. Many of these reports are coming because of proactive voluntary detection by the tech companies. So once a report comes into the cyber tip line, they're arriving every minute of the day, 24 hours a day, coming in automated and by humans who are entering the reports. The reports are given a priority level as they're initially coming in, they're being triaged. A priority 1 would be that there's a child in immediate harm. A priority 2 would be that there's information that indicates a child is likely to be victimized, but it may not be imminent at that moment. A priority 3 would be a report. Very often a website that contains child sexual abuse imagery. We certainly want to address it quickly. However, as Hani said, the harm has been done. We need to address it quickly, but we need to make sure that the children in imminent harm are addressed first. And also we receive what we call a priority E, which essentially means it's a report that has been submitted by a technology company. You'll see the little exclamation point in the triangle there. And what that is indicating is that all reports that are coming in through the National Center, through the cyber tip line, are being evaluated whether or not they need to be escalated. There are times a report may come in as a lower priority, and when we review the material or we review the circumstances of that report, we determine that there actually is a much higher risk to a child. And we are escalating the reports before we send them to law enforcement. We also allow the tech companies the opportunity to say, in this pile of reports we're giving you this week, you really need to look at this report first. So the escalation is a key component. We have the ability to transfer all of this information within the cyber tip line to more than 130 police forces around the globe, actually 130 countries, I apologize. Law enforcement in 130 countries are able to receive cyber tip line reports. I do want to thank Europol for their unique role in helping us distribute these reports within the EU. The report will contain everything. The report contains not only the information on the tech company, also the images that they believe to be child sexual exploitation, limited information on where it may have originated, including an IP address. Based on those localities, we're able to provide it to the appropriate law enforcement for their independent review and evaluation. As you can see, the numbers of cyber tip line reports have continued to grow over the years. This is just since 2014. We received 1.1 million reports from mostly tech companies. Last year, 16.9 million reports. We are on track to already exceed that number this year. I'd like to also specify that a report can contain countless images of child sexual abuse material. We actually encourage companies to try to limit the number of reports that they make to include the more images on one particular incident rather than too many reports. So the more interesting number, I believe, for this conversation is the number of files. These are images and videos of child sexual abuse imagery. Last year, 69 million images of child sexual abuse material were being reported to the cyber tip line. And if we wanted to break it down simply to the EU countries, 2.3 million files, child sexual abuse imagery in 2018, and 3.1 million child sexual abuse imagery files in 2019. So unfortunately, what this is showing us is the problem is only getting worse. Why have the reports gone up to such a dramatic level? It's because companies are choosing to proactively scan for known child sexual abuse material using photo DNA. That is, you can see in 2014, we did not have as many companies who were proactively engaging in this. When we talk about, and it's been referenced by both Jacqueline and Hani, we talk about the impact on survivors. It's critical to think, again, that behind every one of these images and videos is a child. I briefly just want to show you this demonstration. You can see the image on the far left. This actually symbolizes a group of boys who were being sexually abused by several offenders who were neighbors and family friends. The boys had been sexually abused for over 3 years. We first saw their imagery being traded in 2005. They were ultimately rescued by law enforcement and their offenders were held accountable in about 2008. Those young boys, now young men, live with the knowledge that images of their sexual abuse are being traded and continue to be distributed. At NCMEC, we have seen their files close to 1 million times. The second photo is a young girl who was being sexually abused by her dad for over 4 years before law enforcement became aware and were able to arrest the father and put him in jail and save the child and hopefully get her some treatment. That young girl, though, more than almost 1 million times, her images have come through the National Center. Our third child is not even a US child. This is a child who also was being sexually abused by a family member. Images have been traded over 1 million times. Now, I need to emphasize, this is only the number of times they've come to the cyber tip line. This is not how many times they have been trading online. This is how many times a tech company has become aware of their images. And lastly, we have another young girl who was being sexually abused by her father. The sexual abuse occurred for over 6 years. She is a young woman now, and she lives with the knowledge that her images continue to circulate. These are just 4 examples of more than 19,000 children we know have been identified by law enforcement. That law enforcement somewhere in the world knows who the child is and knows who the perpetrator were. These are 19,000 children, young adults now in some cases, who are aware that images are being circulated. Also, they are also becoming increasingly aware that the tech companies are doing something about it. And it is giving them some hope that the tools that are in development and in use are helping minimize their re-victimization. Interestingly, just a side note, some of these children, these are all cases from the early 2000s. I remember my first week working at the National Center and witnessing the horrific imagery for the first time. Those images of the kids that we were looking at back in 1998, they are still circulating. These children live with this, the trauma that continues to follow them. They're offenders in many cases who have already been to jail and already been back out again. And these kids are living with this life sentence, knowing that their images continue to circulate. There was a wonderful survey that was conducted by our friends at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection that did an online survey of individuals who have been depicted in child sexual abuse imagery to find out how have they been coping and what has the impact beyond the sexual abuse itself, which is traumatic, the trauma, the unique trauma inflicted upon them by their images being circulated. And this is a survey, 150 respondents have indicated what we have heard from many others. 95% of them are struggling with anxiety. You can see here that 83% admit to some sort of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts. They are living with this trauma. Here I wanted to share briefly a statement from one of the survivors that we work with. She said, "There's a lot I don't remember, but now I can't forget because the disgusting images of what he did to me are still out there on the internet. It hurts me to know someone is looking at me when I was just a little girl being abused for the camera. I did not choose to be there, but now I am there forever in pictures that people are using to do sick things. I want it all erased. I want it all stopped, but I'm powerless to stop it, just like I was powerless to stop my uncle." But they aren't powerless. There is power with collaborating with the tech industry, collaborating with policymakers to understand that there are surgical ways to be able to detect this material. Hani did a remarkable job, as usual, explaining how the technology works. Jacqueline and Microsoft were leaders at the very beginning of this by recognizing that there needed to be a better way to detect this content. We have referenced the photo DNA signatures and hashes that are being shared with the industry. We have seen the spike of reports that are coming into the National Center. And that is why I want to just give a little background on what the hash sharing looks like. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children provides out hashes to the tech companies who voluntarily wish to proactively detect material on their systems. We have over 3.4 million hashes that have been reviewed and double reviewed by staff members who work at the National Center to confirm that these are indeed, beyond a doubt, child sexual abuse images and videos. We have these hashes available to tech companies who wish to download them and use them. In addition, it goes beyond simply the industry hash sharing. We also facilitate platforms that allow other NGOs to share their hashes, including the Internet Watch Foundation, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, and we also facilitate a platform that allows tech companies to share their own hashes. So one tech company that's doing a remarkable job, they want to share their hashes with another company. So there is no shortage of hash values of known, confirmed child sexual abuse images and videos being made available to companies. We are eternally grateful to those companies that have voluntarily chosen to create a safer environment to reduce the re-victimization to these children who are living not only with trying to recover and put the trauma behind them, but at least know that those companies that have the ability to do something are doing something. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for such a powerful presentation to give us as well this snapshot of the unfortunate, staggering, huge amount of cyber tipline flow. And the numbers that you actually shared with us are really horrible and staggering. So we heard from you, you're eternally grateful to those companies, and so are we, to be honest. So from your presentation, it's pretty clear that the cooperation with the tech companies such as Microsoft and others is essential. So thank you so much just for making the connection with the victims, because I can't even imagine myself what it feels like to walk down the street with the fear that someone, a stranger, could recognize you. And I guess we will hear more on that from Rhiannon, who is here with us today. So now let's move on to the other actor involved as well in this unfortunately vicious circle. Well, in this case, actually, to do more to fight child sexual abuse. And so once again, you also explained what is the pivotal role also played by the law enforcement authority. And we have here with us today, Cathal Delaney, who is the team leader of the AP Twins Prevention and Combating All Forms of Criminality Associated with the Sexual Exploitation and Abuse of Children at Europol. So Cathal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen with you. Everybody hear me okay? Good, thanks, Hani.
Yes.
So thank you to the Intergroup for the invitation to come here today and to address this topic with you. Again, as some of the other speakers have said, a very august company on both sides of the discussion here. So I have a story for you today, and this is a new presentation for me. And just so you know, I did not know what Michelle was going to say in her presentation, so hopefully you'll believe me when I say that. So let me start with the very beginning. We have a child of less than 10 and she's being raped by her father. During previous abuse, he has found the best camera angles, knows what he wants to capture, how not to show his face. He wants to be sure that he can relive this abuse afterwards. Most importantly, he wants to be able to share this privately with his online friends.
Sorry, Cathal, could you speak a bit higher on your microphone, please? I think there's yes, if you could speak just a bit higher.
Is that better?
I think it's better. Yeah, it's better. Thank you.
I want to be sure it's okay for everyone. Okay. So let me start again. A child of less than 10 is being raped by her father. And during previous abuse, he has found the best camera angles, knows what he wants to capture and how not to show his face. He wants to be able to ensure he can relive this abuse afterwards. Most importantly, he wants to be able to share this privately with his online friends. And he wants to increase his status with them, his contribution to what they share together, and show how significant and powerful and popular he is. His daughter is crying and he tells her to stop. It's over soon. She doesn't know what she has done to deserve this. She only knows that it hurts her, that her father does these things, and she loves him, but she doesn't want it to continue. And her father may have said that it will hurt her mother if she tells her or anyone else about it. So when she stopped crying, she says nothing to anyone. But when she's older, she will learn that her father has recorded these moments when he abused her, abused his position of trust with her, manipulated and confused her. He decides to upload the material to an encrypted and therefore unscannable darknet service dedicated to child sexual abuse material. He also later chooses to upload the material on a popular ClearNet chat service that he uses frequently with the same people. And his daughter will also learn about this when she is older, that he was able to very eagerly and easily humiliate her by sharing this abuse in ways he believed was private. So the videos and images are uploaded to the ClearNet chat service. They're detected and they're marked as child sexual abuse material, and their further recirculation is reduced. And the platform provider makes the referral based on the source of the images and refers the material to the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. And then with additional efforts by the platform provider, the source of the images is discovered and referred to NECMEC, and the referral is then processed from there. In later life, the girl will be told that the images and the videos were widely circulated online, and she will be aware that people who pass her on the street may recognize her from those images, that her privacy is forever compromised by them. NECMEC passes this referral automatically to US ICE, the United States competent federal law enforcement agency, and when the investigation involves most of the European member states, US ICE refer it on to Europol through secure Europol systems. And the referral for this victim is included by Europol in our criminal intelligence databases under a strict security and data protection regime designed to protect the rights and privacy of the victim and anyone who could be party to the investigation. The European Cybercrime Centre's image and video analysis system contains more than 50 million unique images and video files of child sexual exploitation and abuse. Its purpose is to enable Europol specialists to gather related material, examine it, locate it to a country, and refer it there to support the identification of victim and offender. With the support of partners in the victim identification task forces, we have examined approximately 20% of this material. In parallel, the referral for this girl, like the 332,000 reports that we processed in 2019, is also processed. This means that further checks on the identities used by those abusing online messaging services to send or receive child abuse material will reveal links. And those links could be back to previous referrals and to other online activity on the ClearNet or Darknet, or even current or previous investigations. At present, proactive checking of details from these referrals is revealing results that are of significant interest to investigators. Our technical specialists support this process by creating and automating the workflows to make the relevant information available to our analysts. This is the human link in the chain that has been referred to by my colleagues already. Additionally, they support the automatic creation of individual country packages for each wave of referrals that are received. And they can also support these and other investigations on the spot in the member states with technical forensic expertise and knowledge, including decryption. And equally, they can support these investigations at Europol headquarters by examining forensic images from which they would extract intelligence, images, and videos. The referrals, including the one that we are following, are then packaged per country by Europol analysts and forwarded there for investigators to assess and to investigate according to their national priorities and legislation. The investigation in the member state, the investigators rather, assess what the referral is that has been forwarded to them, and they use it as a starting point to begin their investigation. They establish the likely identity of the abuser based on details from the report. They verify that probable identity through their own inquiries. A search of the suspect's home is authorized by a judge or a prosecutor. The suspect has multiple digital devices in his home. A forensic triage on site reveals significant quantities of child abuse material. The victim is located, made safe, and the process of supporting her recovery from the abuse can begin. The girl in this narrative could be a boy, and this story combines elements of different, real, successful investigations that Europol has supported. Europol is currently part of the Horizon 2020 funded Grace Research and Innovation project. It is aimed at making the receipt and transmission of these referrals faster and delivering higher value intelligence to the member states that investigators can better prioritize. This collaboration between law enforcement and private partners should lead to more victims being identified and more offenders being brought to justice. Sorry. Europol's EC3 has some direct interaction with those online service providers responsible for the largest numbers of referrals to NECMEC, the National Centre. Those direct interactions take place through the European Internet Forum, Advice to We Protect Global Alliance at the request of the European Commission, the Virtual Global Task Force at NECMEC roundtables, and other fora. The major online service providers make efforts to address the concerns of society in relation to child sexual abuse and exploitation that is carried out through their platforms. This is done through direct actions like NECMEC referrals, by deploying innovation as has been described already to prevent related search terms being used on their platforms, to user management, as Jacqueline described, enforcing terms of use and other methods. They also attempt to manage society and law enforcement's understanding of their role through public relations management and use of law enforcement liaisons. It is essential that as providers of services to a wide and undifferentiated range of customers, many children and teens, that these providers continue to be able to proactively and consistently meet the standards required of them by the European Chiefs of Police earlier this year, including preventing the upload of child sexual abuse material, preventing online grooming, stopping live streaming of child abuse, helping law enforcement agencies to deal with child sexual exploitation, and showing improved openness, transparency, and a willingness to share best practice and technology between the companies. The recently introduced European Commission strategy on the protection of children against child sexual exploitation and abuse, and the interim legislation introducing a temporary derogation to allow online service providers to continue detecting and reporting child sexual abuse online are excellent frameworks for realizing this. The proposed European Child Protection Centre, to which Europol is committed to contributing, will enable the collaboration necessary to make Europe and the world a safer place for all of our children. The strategy recognizes that Europol is a key actor in the fight against child sexual abuse, and the law enforcement component of this new centre could be built on the work and experience that Europol is already doing. Moreover, as mentioned in the strategy, it would be important to adapt Europol's mandate to allow Europol to work with the private sector, including non-governmental organisations like INHO and NECMEC. Thank you all very much for your attention and for the opportunity to present this to you.
Thank you so much, Cathal. So Cathal, just to clarify here for our audience, so your job is actually to review and analyze the reports that you receive from NECMEC. So you go to work every day and you analyze those reports. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, well, it's our job. It's what we do, and we're I'm not saying we're very happy to do it, but we welcome the thanks for it. But I will point out that we don't get the opportunity to analyze all of the reports. That essentially is left to the member states, because the volume is simply so great that it wouldn't be possible for us to do each one.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Well, I mean, with the numbers that Michelle has shared with us, it is not difficult to understand it, to guess that you guys don't have the capacity to go through all of that. So thank you so much for that, Cathal. So I will now give the floor to our next speaker, Rhiannon McDonald. So Rhiannon is a survivor of child sexual abuse online, and she's here with us today to share her story. But I also wanted to say that Rhiannon is also a qualified lawyer, and she has a thorough expertise on this matter. And in fact, she works now as a subject matter expert for the Mary Collins Foundation. I really want to wholeheartedly thank you, Rhiannon, to be here with us today, for your bravery to share with us your story, and to have decided to dedicate your life, your work, to help other people. Thank you so much for that. So now the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Emilio. Just checking everybody can hear me. Excellent.
Yes.
Hi, so I'm Rhiannon. I am a survivor of online grooming and in-person child sexual abuse. This happened when I was 13 years old. I was introduced to somebody online by a friend on MSN Messenger and AOL chat. And I thought that this person that I was speaking to was trying to make friends with me. She said that she was a young adult female, you know, around 20, early 20s. She asked normal questions. How old was I? Where did I live? What music did I listen to? What were my hobbies? Who were my friends? It was all very normal conversation. And this was in the period of, you know, this was in 2003. This was when the internet was all about reaching out across the world and making friends. And that's exactly what I thought was happening. We shared a photo of each other. I sent a photo of myself to her. She sent me a photo that was supposed to be of her. I didn't suspect for 1 second that who I was talking to was not who she said she was. She complimented me and she told me that I was pretty, I was beautiful. As a 13-year-old girl, I didn't have very good self-confidence at all. I was very shy. I had very low self-esteem, and it was very flattering to hear these things from somebody that wasn't a parent or a family member or a friend. And so the conversation, the compliments started slow and picked up over the course of the conversation. I was speaking to her for hours on this evening, and like I say, the compliments snowballed, and she told me then that she was a model and that she thought that I could be a model as well. She asked me for more images, and she kept peppering in these compliments all along the way. Eventually, she asked me for a topless photo. I didn't want to send it. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. It didn't seem something that was right to me at the time. But she told me that she did topless modeling. She'd started when she was not too much older than I was. It's fine. Everybody does it. It's not a big deal. She spent quite a long time convincing me that it was okay to do this. And ultimately, I did send a topless photo. And immediately her demeanor changed, and it wasn't compliments anymore. It was threats. It was, I want you to send me this photo. And if you don't send me that photo, I'm going to print this topless photo out, take it to your school and show everybody you know what you have done. I was terrified because at 13 years old, that's probably, you know, you can't imagine anything worse happening to you at 13 than everybody seeing that you'd sent a topless image. She knew roughly where I lived, and she said that she was going to post those pictures around my local area so that my parents saw them, so that everybody would see this. I didn't feel like I had a choice. When she told me to send more images, more explicit images, to do things on webcam, I didn't feel like I had a choice, and I had to do that for her. She told me that she had sent the images to her boss, and he liked the look of me, and he wanted to meet me to take some professional photos. She asked me for my home address, which I didn't want to give out. I knew that that was wrong. And she told me two things. Firstly, she told me that she could track my IP address and she could find my location anyway. And I didn't know that that wasn't information that was available to her. I thought she was telling the truth. The second thing she told me was, again, that if I did not do this, she was going to share the material that she already had. I gave my address because I didn't feel like I had any other choice. I felt backed into a corner. Her boss, a 50-odd-year-old male, arrived at my house the following morning. He sexually assaulted me in my bedroom, and he took photos of everything that happened. He also told me that he'd printed out and brought the photos from the night before. He told me that if I didn't do what he told me to do, he was going to show everybody. He told me that if I tried to tell anybody, he was going to show everybody. I was scared. I was terrified. I didn't feel like I had any choice in this at all. When he left, I knew instinctively that I wasn't going to report this to anybody. Nothing could have made me tell anybody that. I thought that I was to blame because I'd shared the images, I'd spoken to this person, and I'd given my address out. I didn't understand the concept of grooming at 13 years old. Fortunately, I never saw him again after that. The police apprehended him for incidents against other young girls, and they contacted me 6 months down the line. It went to court and he was sent to prison, for which I'm grateful. But this had a severe impact on my life. For 10 years, I didn't get counselling until I was 22 years old. For 10 years, I had crippling anxiety. I had panic attacks 2 or 3 times a day. I couldn't leave the house some days. I self-harmed. I tried to kill myself twice. I had anger issues, trust issues. I could barely hold it together. It ruined my life for 10 years. One of the big aspects of that is that there was images. So the incident had passed. You know, that wasn't happening anymore. But there were photos and videos out there of what happened to me. And that can't go away. You know, I don't know if, when, or how often those images have been shared. I don't know who's seen them. I don't know who might see them in the future. As was referred to before, I did walk down the street for a long time. Sometimes I still do, wondering whether somebody I pass in the street has seen pictures of me naked as a 13-year-old girl. I wonder about people that I know that use porn sites to look at adult material, I wonder whether they have accidentally stumbled across pictures of me being sexually abused. It is horrific. It will never go away. I am eternally grateful for all of the work that professionals are doing to try and tackle this, to try and prevent it, and to try and remove images from the internet and from services. You know, thank you so much for the work that you do. This is something that no one person, no one organisation can tackle this issue alone. Everybody has a role to play. And today I would really like to ask from the bottom of my heart for legislators and policymakers to do their part and to help technology companies continue to use the technology they have available to try and fight this, because that would mean the world to me and to many other survivors of this crime. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rihanna. Thank you very much for your bravery. We are all here. If we are all here, we owe it to you. So thank you so much for that and for your bravery. I will now open the Q&A session, and I have the pleasure to welcome here with us today some of the members that are actually working hands-on in this piece of legislation now. So I will leave the floor now to our first speaker, MEP Javier Zarzalejos, who is actually representing the EPP group in this file. Javier, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilio. I'm really glad to take part in this event, and I really thank you, those who have been in charge of putting together this conversation. Some of my colleagues at LIBE, because this is well-timed and necessary. We are the group of shadows dealing with this proposal, this proposed legislation by the Commission, have been missing, let's say, a solid technical advice on the technology available and the impact on fundamental rights and privacy. I think that this session is tremendously useful in order to address some of our concerns and also some our doubts. Most of us are not experts on this, so we need guidance, we need advice, and also we need to bring up some questions. But I think that the idea of having in this session the whole cycle of the fight against child sexual abuse, including, of course, this moving testimony of a victim describing all the horrific torture that she has gone through, take us to the real world, and not only to the legal design of a good legislation. And I think that's important. Otherwise, we cannot. Otherwise, we risk to live in our own bubble and not meeting the expectations as legislators that we have. We know that we have different demands, that fundamental rights and privacy are an absolute limit for that. But at the same time, I think that we would pay a very poor service to our societies if we put privacy and fundamental rights as opposed to the fight against child sexual abuse online in this case. So again, it's been extremely helpful. I would just raise a couple of questions. First, while I think there is a consensus on the hashing technology as far as images are concerned, there are more doubts, as I have been able to see, along with my colleagues at the Shadows Group, about the accuracy of grooming technology. And there's an important issue here That is, if how much of the online content has to be filtered in order to make this technology work. You know, there is a principle that that there is no obligation or there's a specific provision of general monitoring of content online. So I would like to have a more precise description of exactly what is the amount of online content that has to be filtered in order to get this grooming technology work. And on the other hand, I think that the Commission is taken, representatives of the Commission are taking part in this meeting. There is something that also has been a bit controversial in our previous conversations and discussions on this, is we have a critical date in principle, which is December the 20th. I just wanted some clarification on how critical this date is, in the sense there is any, let's say, interim legal means to avoid the consequences of not having the legislation ready for this date. Is there any possibility to have some sort of period of grace or something like that? That is something that I would like the Commission representatives to comment on, and that would be it. Emilio, thanks again. Thanks, Ms. Pinici, for your opening statement and for putting together as a co-chair and also same co-chairs for putting together this webinar.
Thank you so much to MEP Javier Zarzalejos for his contribution. So I will just read out very quickly the question and we'll go immediately. I guess the first question could go to Professor Farid. Hani is there. So how much of this online content has to be filtered in order to get the grooming tech work? And then I will move on to our Commission representative, Catherine Bauer-Belst, who is the head of unit of the Cybercrime Department of the European Commission, to answer to the second question that I will repeat for you. Hani, you want to take this question?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's absolutely the right question to ask. So please understand first that for both photo DNA and for the grooming technology, there's a dial. Yeah. And you can control the sensitivity and the error rate with that dial. And we have control over that. So there's two types of mistakes you can make. Somebody is grooming and you miss it. Somebody is not grooming it and you flag it as grooming, right? And that dial allows you to control that mistake, those two mistakes. There will be mistakes. Spam filters make mistakes. Virus filters make mistakes. We know that, but we can control it. Now, the answer to the accuracy is a little tricky because it depends. So if we have 4 months of conversation between an adult and a child, unfolding over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of texts with extreme danger, we are extremely accurate because they've asked for pictures, they've specified their age, they've tried to conceal. There's a phenomenal amount of data there and evidence that supports that. If you have 4 text messages, the accuracy will be less. You have less data. So we also can control that. You can say, we will not make a determination until we have reached a certain amount of information and confidence, and then we will flag. And the third and the last thing I'll say is, please understand also that for the grooming technology, this is meant to help human moderators. It doesn't make decisions in and of itself. There remain humans in the loop. And the way I think about this is, ideally, we would have computers that are so incredibly smart and efficient that they would do all the moderation for us, and humans would never, ever have to look at this material. Because talk to Michelle, talk to the folks at the Canadian Center, they will tell you this is an incredibly hard job. But the technology is not there. But at the same time, we can't rely entirely on humans because it's an overwhelming amount of information. So we do a little bit of both. The computers help filter some of the material that is clearly not problematic, raise levels of concern, and then human moderators step in. But even within the technology, we can control how severe is the grooming, how much data do we have, and we have control over that to control the 2 types of errors that we are going to make. And that is something that has to be configured for each platform, for each agency to figure out where their comfort zone is, but that's built into the technology.
Thank you so much, Hani. Now, Mr. Salejo, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to thank Professor for his answer, which is very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Catherine, I'll turn immediately to you, to your question. So there's a date, there's a deadline, December 21st, when the European Electronic Communication Code will enter into force. So Mr. Salekos is wondering, how important is this deadline to be met? What are the consequences for the cooperation with the industry and at large to the fight against child sexual abuse if this deadline is not met by the European Parliament as we go forward? So Catherine, the floor is on to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Emilio, and thank you for that question also. So the deadline of the 21st of December 2020 comes from EU law. It's in Article 124 of the Electronic Communications Code, which obliges member states to apply the measures in the code from the 21st of December of this year. You were asking about an interim period. There was indeed such an interim period. It started running in December of 2018 for 2 years, where member states had 2 years to implement the rules in the Electronic Communications Code. Now, the definitions in e-privacy already existed, so here it is simply that the meaning of those definitions will change at the latest on 21st of December 2020. So as of the 21st of December, companies who are currently taking voluntary action in the context of electronic communications would not have a legal basis for that action. So for us, it is a hard deadline. I used to work as a company lawyer. If the companies continue to use their tools in interpersonal communication services, they run a legal risk that they should not be running. So for us, this is a hard deadline, and that is why we have taken the extraordinary step of this interim instrument that we have proposed.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I will now, because we are unfortunately running a bit late, so I will now move immediately on with our next speaker. So there's now the time for MEP Sophie Intveld, who is also the shadow rapporteur for the Renew Europe group here in the European Parliament. So MEP Intveld, do you have any question for our speakers here?
Yes, thank you. And I would like to apologize because I missed the first half of the session because I didn't manage, but I would like to thank the Intergroup for organizing this. And I would also like to personally thank Mrs. MacDonald for her testimony and her courage to speak out and also protect other people in doing so and making people aware. I think that's really very impressive. And I would also like to make very clear, because I've seen in recent weeks, I've seen statements going around and we've been receiving emails as MEPs saying, oh, you know, why are you legislating to make the detection of child sexual abuse online impossible? You know, why don't you want to fight this? Why do you think privacy is more important? I think that is all a big mistake. We are not legislating to make it impossible, and we are not saying, you know, privacy concerns take precedence over the objective of fighting child sexual abuse online. I think everybody here, certainly everybody here on screen, and I think every sane person will say it is the highest priority to fight. You know, child sexual abuse online is a term which almost doesn't describe. I mean, Mr. Zarzalejo spoke about torture. I think that's actually a more accurate term. So I don't think there should be any misunderstanding about that. However, if we are legislating, we have to be very precise. We have to make sure that the law is effective, but also that it doesn't do any harm to other people. We also have to make sure that it is necessary to legislate. And there, despite the response we just got from the Commission official, I have to say that I'm not fully convinced yet, because the Commission has so far refused to answer our questions in a very precise manner in writing. But okay, that goes too far for this session. But what I would like to ask, in particular, the Microsoft representative, and again, I apologize for missing your introduction, but just this week we became aware of a range of court cases in my country, the Netherlands. So I imagine this is taking place everywhere, by people who were actually wrongly labeled as people who had been either distributing or sharing, let's say deliberately sharing that kind of material, and those people are now stigmatized for life, which is, the kind of collateral damage that we have to avoid. And when you, I've read some of the reports saying that we have a very high rate of accuracy, 88%. That sounds very good, but there's also a percentage of people who get into trouble in a different way. So what can we do to avoid that? Because I think, those people are, that percentage, there are also people behind that. And we have to find ways, not just in legislation, but also in technology. That's also why we legislate. We have to protect everybody. And I want to know what you're going to do to reduce that rate of, let's say, false hits, false positives. And I know the answer is going to be yes, but it will always be looked at by people. But I have seen cases now where that actually didn't help because of the terms, the contractual terms of Microsoft. And that I find very problematic. And I'd like to know how you're going to improve that.
So thank you very much for the question. And I'd like to respond in reference to one particular case that I've been aware of, again, from your country, a recent Dutch case where an individual's account was closed because he received, let's just call it a questionable image. I need to state first that we don't typically comment on active litigation, but in an effort to be somewhat responsive to you, I want you to know that I did receive an English translation of the court's opinion. And the court found that the photo DNA match of that photo was in fact child sexual exploitation material, and that Microsoft was correct in closing the customer's account per our company policies and practices. And I apologize that you weren't able to hear my intervention at the start, but I'm happy to make it available to you if you would find that useful. But I think you are correct in suggesting what more can we do. And I think what more we can do as a society, and knowing that we need a whole of society approach to this problem of child sexual exploitation and abuse material online, I think this particular case underscores the need for increased public awareness and public education about child sexual exploitation and abuse online. If you recall this particular case, this individual found the image to be funny. Yet the court determined that it was a visual representation of children participating in real or simulated explicit sexual acts. So I think the public needs to embrace its responsibility to report. And so many of the NGOs that are presumably on the line today, as well as NECMEC and others, they always have these campaigns for reporting. Microsoft backs these kinds of campaigns. And we need to report to both authorities and to electronic service providers. And we need to again, get the public to embrace that responsibility and embrace that duty and help all of us know what in fact is illegal material when it's discovered on online services. Thank you.
You want to please go ahead?
Yes, because I don't want to go into this particular case, but the reason it's interesting is that actually, whether or not I mean, I've read not the court's opinion, but the details on that case. And what happened is that this guy received something which was, I think it's questionable whether it could be labeled as child sexual abuse online. But let's say that it is. The point is, he received it. Somebody sent it to him, and because of his settings, it was it ended up in his WhatsApp. But he did not actively spread it, and that was acknowledged. But Microsoft said, yeah, but because of our terms of office, you are now excluded from any kind of service, which makes it impossible for him to do his work. But there may also be other cases where somebody is. And I'm sure there's always whatever legislation you have, you may catch the bulk of the cases, but there will always be cases which fall outside the scope. How are you going to improve the accuracy, and how are you going to reduce the error rate, and how are you going to make sure that people are not either falsely accused or falsely excluded from services, because I think that will also, it's not about, because what you say is absolutely right. Of course, we all need to embrace our responsibility. I mean, I also found it striking in the report we got from the Commission that the cases that are listed are almost exclusively within a circle of family and acquaintances and friends. But if we are going to say, okay, technology and companies are going to voluntarily help fighting this phenomenon, and we want to improve with that, we want to enhance it, then we also have to make sure that the collateral damage is reduced.
So PhotoDNA works against known images of child sexual exploitation and abuse imagery. Michelle also referenced the size of the NECMEC database. These images are already determined to be images of child sexual exploitation and abuse. So all that PhotoDNA is doing on our services is looking for matches. And PhotoDNA looks for that match when an image is shared or when it is put in a public state. So on OneDrive in particular, when it is made available in a public state or it is shared, that's when the individual is putting his or herself at issue and at risk, putting the services at risk, and putting the recipients at risk. So that's when PhotoDNA is activated. That's when the hit or the match takes place. And again, we're matching against an image database of known material. So that's the easiest way that I can describe it to you. Perhaps Professor Farid has more to offer in this regard. He wants to raise
that was not the question.
Can I add a few thoughts, and maybe I think you're asking the right questions, but let's separate two things. Yeah, there's what is the accuracy of the technology. So let's first of all talk about that. So our measured accuracy of PhotoDNA is that the false alarm rate is roughly 1 in 50 billion, right? So we see 50 billion images before we make a mistake. And again, we can adjust that. We can make that essentially 1 in a trillion if we want to by simply controlling the knob. So the likelihood of matching an image that is not in the database is extremely small. And even when it does happen, when it's reviewed, we would say, okay, this is a mistake, and we move on. So that's the core technology. So let's not confuse that with policy. Now what you're asking about, I think, is what is the policy if I send an image that is flagged versus receive an image that is flagged? What is the policy associated with the consequence of that? Do I lose my account forever or just this one specific account? So that's a policy question that I think you're asking, not an accuracy problem. And so that's a fair question, by the way, and we should talk about that. I imagine that policy decision is different across the platforms. Microsoft has a certain terms of service. Facebook has a certain terms of service, Google, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's a fair question to ask, what is the difference between receiving and sending? I don't make policy. You don't want to make me making policy, but I can tell you from the core technology perspective, the accuracy is extremely high. And even when there is a mistake, that will get flagged and fixed. So now we're asking about policy questions. What do you do when a match is made? And I think those are legitimate questions to ask.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know, Catherine would like to take, please, Catherine, from the Commission.
Yes, I just wanted to add 2 quick points, which I think may be relevant here. I think what we're looking at also here is to, of course, facilitate investigations into images. And the difference there is that there is the element of intent, of course, because what you're describing, honorable member, is a situation where there may not have been intent of this individual who received the image, which is criminal in nature, also under our definitions of storing or sharing this. And this has a key difference in that there would not be a criminal investigation necessarily launched into anything because that element is missing, which is crucial for the criminal side of things. Of course, company policy is a different aspect. And I just want to say one more thing on the very important point that you raised, honorable member, on the circle of trust, on the fact that over 90% of abuse takes place in the circle of trust of the child. We know that this is true across all the EU member states, and I think it is important to highlight why nonetheless the online component is such an important element here, because when we see abuse in the circle of trust, as Rhiannon has movingly described, abuse has a way of ensnaring its victims in a way that makes it impossible for them to seek help. And so in many, many cases, we've just seen a judgment in Germany 3 weeks ago against 2 men who were abusing children for 5 years, who came from perfectly normal social circumstances, had intact families, went to school. They were between the ages of 7 and 12 when the abuse was taking place, and nobody in their environment picked up any cues over these 5 years. The children were unable to seek help. Nobody was able to help them. And the fact that this case was ever discovered was thanks to a house search where images were discovered, and that house search only took place because of a NECMEC notification. And that's why the online component is so crucial, even for the 90% of cases that take place in the immediate circle of trust. And that is why the Commission has made it such a prominent component of its own very comprehensive strategy, which also addresses all of the other elements that we're not discussing today and that are just as important on prevention, awareness raising, victim support, and so on. And thank you for allowing me to just add this comment.
Thank you so much. So now in an attempt to actually
Emilia?
try to make the best use, of the remaining time, I just would like to give the floor very quickly to Robert Dem, who is the digital counselor
sorry,
for the German
Emilio?
presidency. Yes?
Emilio, sorry.
Yes.
Emilio, sorry. I need to go to leave the meeting because I need to go to leave the committee, my committee for vote. So I want just, sorry, but I need to go. I want just once again say thank you to our distinguished guest for your contribution. It's very, very important for us to know better the problem, and it's important for us to intervene in a few time. And thank you, Rihanna, because your testimony is for us the reason, remember us the reason to decide in a few time, very, very soon, to protect the children. Thank you so much, all our guests. Thank you so much of the colleague. Thank you so much, Emilio, for moderating the meeting. And sorry if I have to go. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. So I know that as well, some of the members who are there, I have to go as well to Libe committee. I just wanted to give the floor very quickly to Reat, also to Robert Dem, as I said, in representation of the German presidency of the EU Council. Thank you, Mrs. Kinichi. And so Robert, please, very quickly, and then I will move on to Mr. Patrick Breyer. Yes, please, Robert.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot for inviting me to the intergroup meeting, and thanks also to all the contributors. It was really extremely interesting to hear some technical details, but also to hear the testimony of Rhiannon. So thanks a lot also for that. I think it's also not easy to speak in public about this, so we really appreciate that very much. Regarding the exercise that we are doing at the moment, the task that we have on the table at the moment, I would like to stress firstly that we really welcome the strategy that was issued by the Commission in July, I think it was, that basically consists of 2 steps. One step is to really create a sound long-term legal basis for the fight against children abuse online. And one step is to do something in the meantime, because of course this sound legal basis has to be discussed very thoroughly, and all the aspects have really to be scrutinized and analyzed in depth. As well the technical aspects, but also law enforcement aspects, and so on and so on. At the moment, we are in this step 1, let's say, where we are doing an interim regulation that is basically only there to keep the current status quo alive for the next years, let's say, until the long-term legal basis will be in power. So we are at the moment not creating a legal basis. And that's, I would say, the basic conditions under which the current negotiations also in the council take place. Because I have to say, of course, we don't have as many informations as we would wish to have. And if we would create our own standing legal basis, it would probably not be enough at the moment. But that the code definitions kick in the 21st December of 2020, and that this has the known effect and described effect on these practices. It's basically to some extent an unintended effect of the revision of the telecoms framework. By the time it was done, actually everyone expected also the e-privacy regulation to be already in place when the old framework would be repealed. So it has something of an unintended effect, and that we want to heal, let's say, with this interim regulation. And in the council for the moment, we are very committed to actually meet this timeline, because I don't really see a way around it. The way around it is already what we are basically doing for now. And so I can say that in the council, we are moving forward quite quickly with the discussions. We're hoping to already get to a council position in October, and then we would be happy also to get in the trilogues with the Parliament relatively soon. So I think that's everything I can say from now. I don't want to get too much now in the details of the substance. I think a lot was already said on that from the Commission. So.
Thank you so much for that, Robert, and thank you as well for clarifying that what we are discussing now is in fact actually a temporary derogation, and you were very well in saying that this is not the definitive, and this is just part of a bigger and broader strategy of the Commission, as announced as well by the Commission representative herself. And as well, also to clarify for our American friends, Robert is speaking on behalf of the European Council, which is one of the 3 institutions that are all involved in the designing of this legislation. So thank you so much for that, Robert, and to clarify this, and to also, reassuring us that the Council is actually working on meeting this deadline. So I would like now to give the floor for a very, I just think we only have 5 more minutes. We also have to hear from Maud de Boer-Bouquic, who is the president of Missing Children in Europe, and as well the former UN Special Rapporteur on the sale of children, child prostitution and child pornography, and also from as well our UNICEF representative, Afros Kaviani Johnson. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Matt Breyer, and I will kindly ask him to just go straight to the question and indicate as well the expert to whom we would like to address the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilio, and thank you for organizing this intergroup. I'm negotiating this proposal on behalf of the Greens EFA group. And I skip the thanks and the introductory statement I had prepared due to time reasons. Cut me off, Emilio, when I'm too long. My first question is to the Commission. Could you confirm to everybody that the Electronic Communications Code is a directive which has no direct horizontal effect on companies, meaning that also the deadline of 21st of December will mean no legal obligations on companies? And also, can you confirm that this directive does not create a legal basis for this process that we are discussing? It only means that the e-privacy directive would not apply, but it doesn't create a legal basis, meaning that the processing still needs to comply with the data protection legislation. My questions to NECMAC are: the number of reports that you have shown to us are staggering, of course. So that raises the question of the prevalence of child sexual abuse. Can you let us know whether that is on the rise, or whether the number of reports is increasing so much for different reasons? And also, I'd be interested if you have any knowledge on whether the volume of child sexual exploitation material that is exchanged via other channels, meaning secure, encrypted channels, etc., pp., whether that is rising at the same time as the channels that Microsoft has shown, described to us, is being monitored ever more closely. To Microsoft, I have a whole set of questions, and if we can't answer them today, I'm happy to follow up with you. For example, what proportion of all messages are being flagged? So how many users are actually implicated in this? Is it less than 1% maybe? What is the rate of false positives for the grooming detection technology? So can you let us know of how many flags are actually deemed accurate after human review? Can you tell us what other companies are using this technology of yours, this Artemis technology? And do you know if other companies are also applying human review to this? If I look at the number of reports from Facebook that is in the millions, I wonder if they actually apply human review or whether they forward reports automatically. And finally, most importantly, question to Microsoft, have you looked into whether what you're doing complies with the General Data Protection Regulation? And as far as it is about generally and indiscriminately analyzing all private communications and disclosing the flagged content to an organization in a country that we call a third country that lacks an adequate level of data protection. Final question, it goes to Europol. Do I have the time, Emilio?
I guess because, like I said, there are other two people. I would be very happy to connect you then with our experts. How about we take now just this question, and I will give the floor to the people involved here, and then we will try and see if we can answer all the questions at this time.
Okay.
So thank you, Mr. Breyer. So now, please, I think I will start with Catherine, and then start with Catherine, and then I will go to Michelle, and then to Microsoft. I'll see who wants to take the question because there were a lot of questions there. So Catherine, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Emilio, and thank you, honorable member, for these questions. That allows me to clarify. So on the deadline for implementation, indeed, the electronic communications code is a directive, which is a type of legal instrument that requires implementation by the member states. They had 2 years to do so, and by December, they all must have done so. That's their obligation under the directive. Otherwise, we would launch infringement proceedings against them for not having done so. So it is a hard deadline for the member states to implement this legislation. If you look at it from the risk perspective of the companies, even if just one of the member states were to have implemented this in time, the companies run a significant legal risk in continuing their activities. We have indications that, of course, the rate of transposition, as always, is much higher, and that the vast majority of member states will implement in time. So I hope that addresses the question on the directive. On the legal basis, indeed, I want to thank Robert for describing the nature of the instrument that we've set out. It is indeed an interim measure. So we're limiting it to the absolute minimum that will allow us the time to come up with a comprehensive and appropriate solution. So what we are doing is basically just proposing a very targeted exemption from two rules only of the e-privacy framework. So we're not creating any new legal basis. We're preserving the status quo, which means that, of course, all the other rules of the e-privacy framework and the GDPR continues to apply. And I just want to point to an opinion of the Article 29 working group at the time on the possibility to use what was then Article 7 of the old directive, now Article 6 of the GDPR, for the purposes of processing information to detect grooming of children into child sexual abuse. So that's the legal basis that we expect most of the companies will currently be relying on. And we are, again, not creating a new one. If we do that, that would be in the long-term comprehensive piece of legislation, because here we're really just doing the bare minimum to make sure that we're not stopping the status quo from continuing for another little period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, please, would you want to take the question asked by Matt Breyer? Michelle from NECMEC.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your questions. And I did my best to jot them down as they were being asked. First, whether or not the rise in reports to the cyber tip line are indicative of an increase in sexual abuse of children. I really would not be drawing that correlation between the two. What I do believe that it is showing is the increase in the amount of material that is being introduced online. We do see a dramatic increase of newly produced material, not only the more traditionally considered child sexual abuse material, but also situations where the images have been produced by the children upon the request, oftentimes, of an individual that they're talking to online. So we're titling that almost self-generated child sexual exploitation material that is continuing to distribute. And the rise in reports is due to the fact that 99% of our reports are coming in from tech companies, and the companies that are making the most reports are the companies who are using photo DNA to detect known material. And to your question on encryption, are we aware whether or not there is more material being traded on encrypted platforms rather than the open platforms? We're not, because we're completely blind, of course, to what's happening in encrypted environments. So all of the reports that you're seeing are regarding detection or incidents that are occurring on the open web. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Now, allow me, Patrick Breyer, to tell you that the people, since there were a lot of questions actually addressed to Microsoft, again, in attempt to, we are already over time. So in attempt to actually give the floor to our last speakers, I would actually be happy to connect you with our Microsoft experts so that they would be able then to address to your question. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, but we are actually running out of time. Thank you so much as well for staying with us until now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So now we'll give the floor to Maud de Boer-Bocchicchio. Please, Maud, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilio. I hope I can summarize very briefly what my concerns are. What I want to say is to start with that in the earlier presentations, there was clear consensus that there is a need to continue to fight this, the production and the dissemination of CSAM, and that the techniques which are used to do that work. And we have received a lot of evidence during this session, whether it's legal, technical, also witness survivors, the witness testimony. So these are all very important elements which we will keep in mind and which are important to present our case. I'm saying our case because I really strongly support some kind of legislation which would allow these techniques to continue, because I know from my experience as special rapporteur when I visited countries that there were successful actions, convictions of offenders, which and if there were, it was mainly due to the use of filtering software for sites containing CSAM and the cooperation between law enforcement and internet service providers that are connected with these specialized softwares such as photo DNA. And if there were very few convictions, it's because the knowledge and the know-how was not available. Now, Hilde Vaartmans at the beginning said we need ammunition, and I think that in the second part of this session we have had already some views presented to us which show that it's not obvious that this interim legislation will pass. And I think what I would want to make 2 points or 3 points. The first point is that it is important to outline that this is not a European problem. It's not a European problem because a lot of the sexual abuse material which is hosted in Europe affects children worldwide beyond Europe. That's, I mean, you have to go to Internet Watch Foundation information. You'll see that is true. Secondly, and that is really something which I think is important to clarify, and perhaps the Commission can do that. The question which I had is whether sexting between children is covered, and the question is whether automatic removal or taking down of images self-generated by children for their own personal use will be affected by this technique. And the last question, and to which I think we need also to provide an answer, and I hope it is very straightforward, which European Union countries already allow these providers of number independent interpersonal communication services to use technologies for the processing of personal and other data voluntarily. Will the interim regulation be applicable only to the countries who do already allow it, or is it also applicable to other countries? This is something which I think we need to clarify if we want to push this forward. But I really hope that in spite of some resistance and some concerns, that this concern to protect children against sexual abuse online will prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maud, for your contribution and for your global leadership in this issue. Thank you so much for that and for this very pointed step forward question. So I will let them over immediately to Catherine, if she's there. She's still with us. And Catherine, again, I will kindly ask you to be as concise as possible.
Yes, I'll try. And thank you so much, Maud, for the questions. So on the question of whether the exception would apply in all member states. So indeed, the exception would apply in all member states because we're making an exception from EU legislation, in this case from 2 rules of the e-privacy framework. And so it would be, that exception would apply horizontally. Of course, member states can all have their individual legal bases to further allow these issues. Absent such a specific legal basis, there would be the rules of the GDPR that simply apply across the board, the general data protection legislation. When it comes to sexting, indeed, if there is a generation of explicit images that fall under the definition of child sexual abuse, those might be picked up by the tools. And again, here, of course, we have a differentiation in the directive criminalizing child sexual abuse to make sure that consensual sexual behavior among children that is in line with normal sexual development is not harmed in any way by criminalizing something that is not in any way comparable to child sexual abuse. And that line is drawn both in the directive and then in national legislation implementing that into the national criminal codes. I hope that helps clarify.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you so much. So now, last but not certainly least, we are going to hear, unfortunately, you're going to have the very, very difficult task to wrap it up and do it in 2 minutes. We are going to go to Afros Kaviani Johnson, who is child protection specialist at the UNICEF headquarters in New York. Afros, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emilio, and distinguished experts and panelists and participants. In the interest of time, I'm going to hold our questions and just make a brief intervention on UNICEF's behalf. Just to note, of course, that keeping children safe from sexual abuse and exploitation is part of our core mandate. And the accelerating scale, severity, and complexity of online child abuse is cause for great concern and demands our urgent action. We need strong cooperation between law enforcement, technology companies, civil society, and communities to end the serious violation of children's rights. Technology solutions to detect and remove child sexual abuse materials are necessary to deal with the huge volume of content currently in circulation. And it's very important that these tools mature in a form that can be applied without compromising the rights to privacy of lawful users of online platforms. UNICEF commends the strong commitment from the EU in tackling child sexual abuse. The EU strategy for an effective fight against child sexual abuse and related actions can really serve as an example, even beyond the region. And our UNICEF European and Central Asia office especially looks forward to working with the EU in the implementation of this strategy. While robust longer-term measures are developed and implemented, we're of the view that the proposed interim derogation would be a positive step, and we welcome the opportunity to continue dialogue and collaboration in the development of the longer-term legislation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Afros, to end also with such a positive note. And we will look forward very much to work, of course, with UNICEF, who is a strong partner of the Intergroup on Children's Rights. I really want to thank wholeheartedly all of our wonderful guests today. I hope that also our friends at home found this exercise and this expert meeting useful, especially to try and clarify what are all the technical aspects involved in this piece of legislation, and to also kind of showcase who are the actors behind this and who are the people also working on to actually in the fight against sexual abuse. I really very much thank all of the experts and and all of you guys for the patience to be with us half an hour more than expected. That means that it was pretty interesting and useful, I guess. And thank you so much to Rhiannon. Once again, your bravery is absolutely inspiring. And once again, if we are all here, it's just for you and we owe it to you. And we want to prevent this from happening to other people. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Also on behalf of my members and the entire Intergroup on Children's Rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emilio.
Thank you, Emilio.